Deck the Heart is generally a good film. There's one scene that's utterly ridiculous and makes the protagonist look like an idiot, but I'll talk about that with a spoiler warning. I don't want to spoil anything before that because I do generally recommend the film. This was released in 2021. It's written and directed by Candice Cain, and it stars Ashley Brinkman as Meredith. And Meredith is an event planner, and she's hired by this rather wealthy individual to deck out his house for Christmas. And while she's there, of course, she spends a lot of time with him, and they get to know each other, and there are sparks that start to fly between them. And I will say the romantic aspect of this Christmas rom com I thought worked really, really well. I think the on screen chemistry was very believable. Brinkman and Joe Kurak, who plays our romantic love interest Chris, they're both very likable on screen together and they work really well. That part of it I loved. Seeing Mary, as she's called, work on the house was nice. We got to kind of see gradual changes to the home as she decorated more and more, and it's generally a very pleasant, pretty festive narrative. There are hot drinks, there are decorations, there's some really nice Christmas music. If you're looking for a film that will help to get you in the Christmas spirit, this is one of them. And I don't want to say too much more about the specifics of the narrative because I do recommend it. But there is a scene I'll talk about in a moment that was a bit ridiculous. There's also another scene that I feel was a huge cop out, but I'm wondering if it was maybe a budget issue. But again, I'll leave that for a moment. This is definitely a good film to go with if you want something that's an easy watch. That's generally one scene aside, not irritating. And I say that because a lot of Christmas rom coms, well, some Christmas rom coms, will have a moment in the film where at least one of the characters will completely overreact to the situation. A problem could have been resolved really quickly if they'd just listened to the other person, but that's not in this. So I never felt irritated by any of the characters' responses to each other's actions. And it was a very pleasant watch, very festive, generally very well shot with a decent pace. There were a few scenes that could have been cut out, a bit of dialogue that could have been tidied up a bit, but generally it was a pretty good film and I'm happy to recommend it. If you haven't seen it and you like Christmas rom-coms, Deck the Heart is worth checking out. Okay, so I will go in with a few spoiler details now. I won't spoil ultimately what happens at the end with the relationship or anything like that, but I will discuss one scene that made Mary look like an idiot and another scene that felt like a cop out. That one's easier to address. Basically, Mary's standing outside the house. She's about to turn on the lights that she put on the front of the house, the big reveal of the outside Christmas decorations, and we don't get to see them. As a viewer, all we see are a couple of strings of, I think, blue lights behind her, and the rest of the people in the scene look up and gaze in wonder. And I think one of the children or younger characters, I think, comments that one of the decorations is an angel. How lovely! I want to see what that looks like. Well, you're not allowed. You're not allowed to see it. But again, as I said, maybe that was a budgeting issue. Maybe they had planned to do this big reveal, but they just didn't have the funds left or they ran out of time. I can't imagine that would ever be a conscious decision to have this big reveal in the film and not let the viewer enjoy it. So, benefit of the doubt, I'm just going to assume it was maybe a budget issue or some other issue that was outside of their control. The other thing, though, the other issue is definitely within their control and made Meredith look like an absolute fool. We learn earlier on in the film that if you don't wedge this door open, the back door, it will slide shut and lock you out. And later on in the film, the door accidentally shuts on her, and Chris is not in at the moment. And she's outside, not dressed very warmly. She's just wearing, I think, a sweater and jeans, if I remember rightly. And then it starts to snow. And the snowfall looks really beautiful. It's really beautifully done. And she decides the best thing to do in this situation is to sit on the floor and go to sleep. I don't imagine she intended to go to sleep, but she did. She sat on the floor, which in itself is a bad idea because the floor is going to be cold, and then just wait. And I feel like she was an idiot. First of all, we know she drives. Maybe she didn't have her car keys on her, fair enough, but if they needed the story where she was locked outside, they could have at least put her in her car and had her just waiting around. But again, the scene was completely pointless. But even if she couldn't get to her car, any fully grown adult knows you don't just lie down in the snow, particularly when you've got nothing to put underneath you, you're wearing not very practical clothing for sleeping outside in winter. She could either have gone to find a neighbour, to get help, to find an alcove in the house. It's a big property. There surely would have been at least a better place to keep warm than out in the open. Or ultimately, keep walking, keep moving. You don't have to run laps, but just keep your blood circulating to keep your body as warm as possible. Don't just lie down on the cold, snowy ground. What an idiot. I lost any faith in her ability to make sensible judgments after that. But the scene didn't affect my overall enjoyment of the film. It was a good film, it's a pleasant film. If you can kind of just remove that scene and a couple of scenes that come after it from your mind, then it's actually not a bad film, and I do recommend it. Yes, a little bit disappointed we didn't get this big reveal with the lights outside, considering the film is largely about a protagonist who decorates for a living and caters and plans these events. But other than that, Deck the Heart is not a bad film. I probably wouldn't watch it again, but if you're looking for a Christmas rom com, then I do recommend it.